He walked down the quiet streets, his hands tucked deep into the pockets of his worn coat. The wind was cold, brushing against his face like a gentle warning that winter was settling in. He had been walking for hours, trying to make sense of the day, but mostly just thinking about how to get by. Work was scarce, and money was tighter than he liked. Any small job that could earn him a few dollars was a gift, even if it was hard and boring. Today, he had been given one of those jobs. A cleaning job at a community hall that rarely had anyone visit it. He didn't mind. Any work was work. The hall was old, with cracked windows and peeling paint. But there was a certain charm to it, something that felt lived in and familiar, even if it had been neglected for years. The manager, a stern man with a clipboard, greeted him without much enthusiasm. "You know what to do," the manager said, pointing around the hall. "Clean everything. Dust, sweep, mop, and leave the piano alone. Don't touch it." He nodded quietly. It wasn't the first time someone had told him to ignore the piano. He had been curious about it for years, ever since he first saw it. It was an old upright piano, covered in dust and scratches, with faded keys that told stories of songs played long ago. Today, however, it was just another thing to clean around, another obstacle in his path. He grabbed his mop and bucket, dragging them across the floor. The sound echoed in the empty hall, a rhythmic companion to his thoughts. Every corner he cleaned, every speck of dust he wiped away, reminded him of other jobs he had done in his life. Jobs that were thankless but necessary. Jobs that kept him moving forward, even when the world seemed indifferent. As he moved closer to the piano, he couldn't help but pause. The keys were yellowed with age, and the wood was chipped in places, but it had a presence. Something about it made him stop for a moment, just looking at it, imagining the music it must have once made. He shook his head, reminding himself of the manager's words. He was here to clean, not play. Still, as he wiped the dust from the top, he noticed tiny details. The curve of the wood, the faded brand name, the small scratches that hinted at years of use. It was clear someone had cared for it once. The thought tugged at something deep inside him. He remembered the times he had played music, how it had felt to sit at a piano and let his fingers move freely, letting the notes flow without thinking. Those days felt far away now, almost like a different life. The memory was strong. He set the rag down and began sweeping the floor around the piano. Each movement was methodical, almost meditative. He noticed the echo of his broom across the wooden floor, the way it reminded him of a heartbeat, steady and persistent. Even in the silence of the hall, there was life, and for a moment he felt a strange sense of peace. Hours passed as he worked. He dusted shelves, cleaned windows, and polished old chairs. The hall slowly transformed under his care, from a forgotten space to a place that felt usable again. Yet, despite the satisfaction of a job well done, his eyes kept returning to the piano. It seemed to call to him quietly, a soft invitation that he tried to resist. He thought about the people who might have played it before, about the songs that had filled the room with laughter or tears. He wondered if anyone would ever play it again. The thought made him sad, but also sparked a tiny flame of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone like him could bring it back to life. During his break, he sat on a nearby bench and watched the sunlight filter through the cracked windows. The dust particles floated in the light like tiny stars. He thought about his life, about how he had always followed rules and done what was expected, but sometimes felt invisible, like his talents and dreams didn't matter. Cleaning the hall was easy, but it didn't satisfy the part of him that longed for something more. He remembered the first time he had sat at a piano, a smaller one in a neighbor's home. He had been curious, touching the keys gently, unsure of what would happen. And then, when a note sounded, it felt like magic. The sound had resonated not just in the room, but in him, as if the piano had recognized him and welcomed him. That memory had stayed with him, a reminder of a joy that was his alone. Now, as he cleaned, he felt that same curiosity returning, stronger than before. He tried to focus on the task, but the piano seemed to demand his attention. He could imagine the music waiting inside it, quiet but persistent, ready to spill out if someone cared enough to listen. He worked carefully, moving around the piano without touching it, but his fingers itched to feel the keys. He remembered the way they had moved once, nimble and confident, translating thoughts into sound effortlessly. It had been years since he played, but muscle memory has a way of staying with you, even when your mind forgets. The hall was nearly spotless now. Dust was gone, floors shone faintly in the sunlight, and the air smelled faintly of cleaning products mixed with old wood. He looked around, feeling a sense of accomplishment, yet a small part of him was restless. The piano still sat quietly in the corner, waiting. He straightened the chairs and stacked them neatly against the wall. As he did, a small smile crept onto his face. There was pride in making something neglected look cared for. He felt useful, important even, in a way that money or recognition couldn't measure. And yet, the piano loomed like a silent question, asking if he was ready to face a part of himself he had long ignored. He finished the last of his cleaning, wiped his hands on his coat, and stepped back. The hall looked transformed. Even the manager, who came to inspect the work, seemed surprised by the change. "Good job," the manager said gruffly. "But remember, don't touch the piano." He nodded, but as the manager walked away, he found his gaze returning to the instrument. Alone again, he allowed himself a small, hesitant step forward. He didn't touch the keys yet, just reached out to brush some dust from the surface. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. A memory surfaced unbidden. The first song he ever learned. The way the notes had flowed beneath his fingers. How the music had seemed to lift him above all worries. It was a fleeting joy, a reminder that he had once been capable of creating something beautiful. The piano sat there, waiting, as if inviting him to try again. He took a deep breath, stepping back slightly. He wasn't supposed to play. That was the rule. But for the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine just pressing one key, listening to its sound, feeling the connection again. The urge was irresistible, but he paused, knowing that even imagining it was a step toward something bigger. He finished his break and returned to tidying, up small details, dusting corners, arranging pamphlets, wiping smudges from windows. Yet, his mind kept returning to the piano, and a quiet excitement began to build. Cleaning had been his duty, his job, but the piano had become something more. It was a bridge to a part of himself that had been dormant for too long, a reminder that even in the ordinary, magic could exist. As the day wore on, the hall grew quieter. Sunlight shifted, painting long shadows across the floor. He continued working, humming softly to himself, letting the rhythm of his cleaning and the imagined music mingle in his mind. The piano was silent, but it felt alive, filled with potential. It waited for the moment when someone would care enough to awaken it. He finally finished for the day, stacking his cleaning supplies neatly in the corner. The hall looked bright, cared for, almost welcoming. He stood for a moment, taking in the space he had transformed. And then, as he prepared to leave, his eyes drifted one last time to the piano. It sat quietly, as if watching him, as if it knew he would return. A sense of anticipation filled the room, unspoken, yet powerful. Something was about to change, though he didn't know it yet. He left the hall, stepping into the cool evening air, carrying a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years. The piano waited silently behind him, patient and ready for the music that was coming. The next day, he found himself walking back to the hall earlier than usual. The cold morning air bit at his cheeks, but he barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, focused on the old piano waiting quietly in the corner. Cleaning jobs had become routine, predictable, and honest work, but the piano stirred something deeper inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. It was a quiet calling he could no longer ignore as he entered the hall. Sunlight streamed through the cracked windows, catching the dust in the air. It sparkled like tiny stars, a small miracle in the otherwise ordinary room. He dropped his coat on a bench and grabbed a rag, but his eyes immediately went to the piano. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at it. The surface was still dusty, the keys faded and uneven, but to him, it looked like a friend waiting to be acknowledged. He set down his cleaning supplies and slowly approached the piano. His hands hovered just above the keys, His fingers trembled slightly, a mix of nerves and anticipation. He hadn't played in years, not since life had pulled him in different directions. But the memory of music, of melodies flowing effortlessly from his hands, was vivid. He closed his eyes for a moment, recalling the sensation of the keys beneath his fingertips. The way music had once carried him away from worries, pain, and the weight of the world. He pressed down on a single key. The sound was rough, out of tune, but it resonated in the empty hall like a heartbeat. His eyes widened slightly. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Encouraged, he pressed another key. Then another. Slowly, the notes began to form a pattern, a simple rhythm that reminded him of the first songs he had learned as a child. Each note stirred memories of joy and hope he had almost forgotten. He leaned in closer, letting the music guide his hands, letting the piano speak to him as it had once done. Time passed unnoticed. He played softly at first, almost shyly, listening to each sound as if testing the water. The piano responded, imperfectly but faithfully, to his touch. He began to remember more complex movements, the way his fingers had once danced across the keys, creating melodies that lifted the spirit. For the first time in a long time, he felt alive in a way that cleaning floors could never give him. The music seemed to flow naturally, as if it had been waiting all this time for him to return. He didn't hear the door open or the footsteps approaching. One by one, people began to enter the hall, drawn by the sound that seemed to float in the air. A janitor paused, a delivery man lingered near the entrance, and then a young girl peeked in from the hallway. None of them expected to see a man sitting at a piano in an old community hall, playing with an ease that was mesmerizing. They stopped and watched quietly, not wanting to interrupt. He played on, unaware of the audience gathering around him. The music was tentative at first, then stronger, more confident. His emotions poured into every note, memories of better days, longings, regrets, and hopes for the future. The hall seemed to come alive with each chord, the air vibrating softly, as if in response to his touch. He felt a connection, not just to the piano, but to the space itself. It had waited patiently, a silent witness, ready to transform the ordinary into something extraordinary. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. He had lost track of time completely. The piano keys were worn, and some notes were stubbornly out of tune, but that didn't matter. The imperfections made the music human, raw, and honest. He smiled faintly, realizing that this was not about perfection. It was about expression. It's about reconnecting with a part of himself that had been hidden for too long. When he finally paused, the hall was still. Even the smallest sounds, the hum of the heaters, the faint creak of the floorboards, seemed to have stopped in respect. For a moment, he thought he had imagined the presence of others, but then soft whispers and claps began to fill the room. He looked up, startled, to see several people smiling at him, eyes wide with wonder. Some wiped tears, others just stared, completely captivated by what they had witnessed. He stood there, unsure of what to say. Embarrassment and pride fought within him, but the overwhelming feeling was gratitude. Gratitude that he had returned to something he loved, gratitude that the piano had responded, and gratitude that his music had touched others, even unintentionally. One person stepped forward, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, and asked, "Where did you learn to play like that?" He shrugged, a small, shy smile forming. "I've played since I was young," he said quietly. "It's been a long time, though." Another person asked if he would play again tomorrow, and another nodded enthusiastically. The hall, which had once seemed quiet and forgotten, now felt alive, as if the music had awakened it from a long sleep. The piano had given him something back, something more than joy had given him purpose. As the crowd left, he carefully cleaned around the piano again, making sure not to disturb it. His hands lingered on the keys for a brief moment, not playing, just touching, feeling the warmth and presence of the instrument. He realized that the piano was more than wood and strings. It was a bridge to his past, a reminder that he was capable of creating beauty, even in the most unlikely places. He left the hall that evening with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. The cold air didn't bother him. The world seemed softer, somehow more inviting. He carried with him a renewed sense of self, an understanding that sometimes life's moments of magic appeared when least expected. The piano had been waiting, and he had answered its call. Over the next few days, he returned to the hall regularly, each time feeling more confident. He cleaned, as always, but also allowed himself small moments to play, to explore melodies and chords he had almost forgotten. He discovered that even broken, imperfect pianos could produce extraordinary music when treated with care and attention. The hall, once empty and lifeless, became a sanctuary not just for him, but for anyone who happened to hear the music. The story of the quiet man at the old piano began to spread, slowly but surely. Neighbors and visitors started coming to the hall, curious about the music that seemed to float through the neighborhood like a gentle breeze. People who had never paid attention before found themselves pausing, listening, and leaving with a sense of wonder. The music had a way of touching hearts, reminding everyone that beauty could appear in the most unexpected places. For him, the piano became a constant companion. It demanded nothing, offered everything. He learned that music wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about connection, expression, and rediscovering the parts of oneself that life sometimes buries. Each note was a step back to the joy he had once known, a quiet rebellion against the routine and hardship that had dominated his life. He began to dream again, not just about playing, but about what he could create, the stories he could tell with his music. He realized that the hall, the piano, and the audience, no matter how small, were part of a larger journey. One that didn't rely on anyone else's approval, but on his willingness to embrace his talent and let it shine. And so, each day, he returned, cleaning with care, playing with passion, and slowly transforming not just the hall, but himself. The quiet man, once invisible, found a voice in the piano. Each key, each melody, became a testament to resilience, hope, and the enduring power of art to touch lives. The piano, dusty and forgotten, had become a doorway to possibility, and he had stepped through it, unsure of where it would lead, but certain that the journey itself was worth every note. The hall was quieter than usual that morning, the kind of quiet that makes small sounds feel louder, more important. He arrived earlier than normal, a bag of cleaning supplies in one hand and a cautious sense of excitement in his heart. Today, he didn't just want to clean. He wanted to let the piano speak a little more, to explore the music that had been waiting for him so patiently. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. Letting the sunlight spill over the dusty floor, he set his bag down and approached the piano. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, swirling around like tiny sparks of life. His fingers hovered above the keys, hesitant at first, but the pull was irresistible. He pressed down on a single key, then another, and soon he was playing softly, cautiously, testing the waters of what was possible. The sound was uneven at first, but he didn't mind. The piano was patient, forgiving. It waited for him to remember, to let go of fear and doubt. As he played, the rhythm began to settle into something familiar. Notes flowed into a melody that felt like it belonged to him, like a hidden language he had forgotten he knew. His fingers moved with growing confidence, each key responding to the touch, imperfect but alive. For the first time in years, he felt free, as though the piano had opened a door he thought had been locked forever. Unbeknownst to him, someone had entered the hall earlier. A young man delivering packages stopped in the doorway, mesmerized by the soft, unexpected music. He stayed still, leaning against the wall, careful not to interrupt. The music was captivating, full of emotion, more than just sound. It carried a story, a depth that words could not capture. Another visitor, a woman coming to check on the hall, paused mid-step. She listened, unsure if she should leave or stay. The music was like a gentle pull, drawing everyone closer. He didn't notice the audience at first. The sound of the keys was all-encompassing, a private conversation between him and the piano. His heart began to race, not from fear, but from the excitement of rediscovering something lost. He remembered the first song he had learned, the joy of creating sound that could make people feel. Today, he was creating again, letting the music take him wherever it wanted as he played. Became aware of movement out of the corner of his eye. People were gathering quietly, forming a small, silent crowd. They didn't speak, didn't clap yet, but they were there, watching. He paused for a moment, unsure if he should stop. but the piano seemed to encourage him, urging him to continue. He took a deep breath and let his fingers find the keys again, letting the melody grow stronger, richer, more confident. The hall, once dull and empty, seemed to transform around him. Sunlight caught the edges of the chairs, reflecting on the polished floor, and the dust no longer felt like decay, but like a reminder of the life that had been here before. The music carried history, hope, and a sense of possibility. Each note told a story. Each chord echoed with emotion that reached the ears and hearts of the listeners. He played longer than he intended. Time seemed to stretch, the outside world disappearing completely. The people around him didn't move, didn't interrupt, just watched and listened, absorbing every note. Their expressions were a mix of awe, wonder, and quiet appreciation. Some smiled softly, others looked on with tears in their eyes. The music had reached them, even though he hadn't planned for it. Finally, he stopped, letting his hands hover above the keys. The room was still for a long moment, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Then a soft clap broke the silence. One person began, hesitant, unsure if it was proper. Soon, more claps joined in, growing louder and more confident. He looked up, startled, his heart skipping a beat. People were looking at him with admiration, surprise, and gratitude. His private moment had become public, and it was met with something more powerful than he could have imagined. He felt a wave of embarrassment, a sudden awareness that he had been watched without knowing. Yet it was tempered by pride, by the undeniable truth that his music had moved people. The hall manager appeared in the doorway, frowning at first, ready to scold him. But when the manager heard the final notes, his expression softened, a mix of surprise and reluctant admiration. He had expected trouble, not beauty. "Learn to play like that?" one of the listeners asked, stepping forward. The question was simple, but it carried weight. He hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I've played since I was a child," he said softly. "It's been a long time, but I still remember." His voice trembled slightly, but the words were honest. The audience nodded, understanding without needing more. The hall, which had been empty and silent for so long, now felt alive. People lingered, asking questions, complimenting him, expressing surprise at the talent they had never known existed in this quiet man. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. The music had bridged a gap, connected him to others, and reminded everyone that beauty can appear unexpectedly, in the hands of someone who simply cares to play. Over the next few hours, more people arrived, drawn by the sounds that had already begun to spread outside the hall. Neighbors, passersby, and even a few children stopped to listen. He played when he could, took short breaks to clean, and returned to the keys, letting the music guide him. Every note was a connection, every melody a story shared without words. He realized that the piano had become more than just an instrument. It was a companion, a voice, a bridge between his world and the world around him. It gave him confidence, hope, and a sense of purpose. Cleaning the hall had been his job, but the music had become his calling. He understood now that talent isn't just about perfection. It's about expression, emotion, and the courage to share what you love, even when no one expects it. As the day drew to a close, he finally paused, wiping his hands on a rag and stepping back. The room was filled with quiet murmurs of admiration and gratitude. People thanked him, smiled, and slowly left, each carrying a sense of wonder with them. He watched them go, feeling a warmth in his chest, a quiet pride that he had not experienced before. The hall was empty again, sunlight fading through the windows, and he approached the piano one last time. He ran his fingers lightly over the keys, feeling their smooth surfaces, their imperfections, their history. The music had changed something. Inside him, a sense of purpose and possibility he had forgotten. The piano had waited patiently, and now it had awakened not just the hall, but him as well. He packed up his supplies, leaving the hall cleaner than he found it, but also filled with music, memories, and the promise of more to come. Walking out into the cool evening air, he felt different, lighter, braver, and ready for the next day. The piano would be there, waiting patiently, and he would return, eager to explore more melodies, more stories, more moments of connection that could change not only his life, but the lives of everyone who happened to hear him play. The following days were unlike any he had experienced before. Each morning, he walked to the hall with a sense of anticipation that had been missing from his life for a long time. Cleaning the space was still part of his duty, but it no longer felt like just a job. It had become something more a ritual. That allowed him to connect with music, with the piano, and, unexpectedly, with people who came to hear him play. He arrived one morning to find a small group already waiting by the door. Word had spread quietly through the neighborhood, and people had come to see the man who could make a dusty piano sing. They smiled politely, some nodding, others whispering greetings. He felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. It was one thing to play privately, was another to play while people watched, their eyes full of expectation. He set his cleaning supplies aside and approached the piano, his hands hovering over the keys. Taking a deep breath, he began to play. The music was soft at first, tentative, testing the waters of the room and the people in it. Then, as his confidence grew, the melody blossomed. Notes intertwined, creating a tapestry of sound that seemed to fill every corner of the hall. The listeners leaned closer, silent, enraptured by the unexpected beauty. This time, he noticed the manager standing quietly near the back, clipboard forgotten in his hand. The stern expression had softened, replaced with curiosity and a hint of admiration. He hadn't expected this man to care about music, yet here he was, watching quietly as the piano came alive under the touch of a man who had been invisible for so long. He had played longer than usual that day, exploring melodies he had only dreamed of. Some were familiar from his childhood, while others were new, born from the emotions he had stored for years. Joy, sadness, hope, and longing mingled together in the music, creating a story without words. People listened with rapt attention, moved in ways he couldn't have imagined. Some had tears in their eyes, others smiled softly, caught in the beauty of the moment. When he finally paused, the hall erupted in applause. He was taken aback, a blush creeping over his face. He had expected polite clapping, maybe some quiet praise, but this was more than that. The music had touched something deep in them, and the reaction was overwhelming. People came forward, asking questions, praising his skill, and expressing how the music had made them feel. It was a new experience, one that left him both nervous and exhilarated. The manager approached cautiously, unsure how to react. "I didn't know," he began, trailing off. The words hung in the air, unspoken yet heavy with meaning. He nodded politely, unsure what to say himself. The manager cleared his throat and smiled faintly. "That piano? It's been here a long time. No one has played it like that in years. Thank you." The praise was unexpected, and he felt a warmth in his chest. It was rare for anyone to notice him, to appreciate not just his work, but something he loved deeply. For years he had worked quietly, without recognition, and now, finally, his talent was seen and valued. The feeling was intoxicating, yet humbling. Over the next few weeks, more people began to come, quietly at first. Then, with growing confidence, students, neighbors, even a local reporter who had heard whispers of the man and his piano. Each day the hall became busier, filled with the sounds of conversation and anticipation. The quiet hum of curiosity that only grew stronger as the music began. He cleaned and played, sometimes alternating between the two, learning to balance the two roles. The piano, once just an object of curiosity, had become a center of life and energy. Despite the growing attention, he remained humble, focusing on the music rather than himself. He understood that it wasn't about fame or recognition, but about connection, the connection between himself, the piano, and those who came to listen. Each note was a gift, each melody a bridge between hearts. And in return, the audience offered something precious: respect, admiration, and gratitude. One day, a local music teacher approached him with a gentle smile. "You have a gift," she said softly. "Have you ever considered teaching or performing more formally?" He shook his head, uncertain, shy. The thought had never occurred to him. Music had been personal, private, something that had sustained him quietly through life's challenges. Faced with the idea of sharing it more widely, he felt both excitement and fear. The teacher encouraged him, offering guidance, suggesting, that he could reach more people with his music than he ever imagined. He listened quietly, considering the possibility. The piano had changed his life already, and maybe, just maybe, it could change the lives of others as well. The idea was thrilling yet daunting, a step into a future he hadn't dared to imagine. In the evenings, he reflected on the changes that had occurred. The hall, once forgotten, had become a place of community and inspiration. The piano, once silent, had become a voice for emotions long buried. And he, once invisible, had found recognition not for cleaning or chores, but for the talent and passion that had always been inside him. It was a shift that touched every part of his life, reshaping how he saw himself and the world around him. The community responded in ways that surprised him. People offered to help maintain the hall, to clean and care for the space, so that it could remain welcoming. Others brought friends and family, spreading the word of the music that now filled the air. The hall had transformed from a place of neglect into a hub of inspiration, a small beacon of beauty and hope. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, realizing that his simple act of playing could create ripples far beyond his imagination. He continued to play daily, exploring new melodies, revisiting old ones, and gradually gaining confidence in his skill. The audience grew, not just in number, but in appreciation, learning to pause, listen, and feel the music instead of rushing past it. Children would sit quietly near the piano, watching his fingers move across the keys, absorbing not just the sound but the emotion behind it. Adults found themselves reflecting on memories, dreams, and emotions stirred by the music. One afternoon, a young man approached him with a question. "How do you play with so much feeling? How do you make the piano sound alive?" He paused, considering the question. "I don't know if it's just skill," he said finally. "I think it's about letting the music speak, letting it tell its own story, and being honest with yourself while you play." The young man nodded thoughtfully, taking in the answer. For him, it was a lesson in more than music hit. It was a lesson in life, the recognition. While gratifying also brought responsibility. People now looked to him not just as a performer, but as someone who could inspire, teach, and guide. It was a challenge he had never anticipated, but one he embraced with quiet determination. The piano had given him more than music. It had given him purpose, and with purpose came a new set of obligations, ones he was ready to meet. Each day the hall became more than just a building. It became a space where people could come together, share experiences, and connect through the universal language of music. The piano remained at the heart of it, patient and steadfast, a silent partner in every note played. Together they had created something enduring, something that reached beyond individual lives into the fabric of the community itself. He realized that the simple act of playing, once a private escape, had become a source of inspiration and joy for many. The music was no longer just for him. It belonged to everyone who heard it, everyone who felt it. And in that realization, he found fulfillment beyond anything he had imagined when he first walked into the hall, dragging his mop and bucket, unaware of the journey that awaited him. The piano had taught him patience, resilience, and the quiet power of expression. It had reminded him that even in the most ordinary circumstances, extraordinary things could happen. And as he prepared to leave the hall each evening, he looked back at the instrument with gratitude and respect, knowing that the music would continue, growing, inspiring, and transforming lives, including his own. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the hall, casting warm light across the polished floor. He walked in, carrying his cleaning supplies, but today he felt lighter, freer than ever before. The piano waited silently, its keys worn, its wood scarred, yet it seemed alive, as if it had been expecting him. He smiled, feeling the pull of something bigger than himself, something that had been quietly waiting for years. He began his routine, dusting shelves and sweeping the floor, but his mind was mostly on the piano. Today, he allowed himself to linger longer, his fingers brushing over the keys before playing a soft note. The sound, though imperfect, carried with it a sense of anticipation and hope. The hall was quiet, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. People had begun to hear about the music. Curiosity had a way of drawing them in. As he played, the melody grew tentative at first, then more confident. Each note felt like a conversation, a dialogue between him, the piano, and the invisible threads that connected him to everyone who had come to listen in the past. He lost himself in the music, feeling joy and sorrow intertwine in every chord. The hall, once silent and neglected, vibrated with life. Carrying the sound into corners that had been forgotten for years, a small group arrived quietly, drawn by the soft music spilling out into the neighborhood. They paused in the doorway, watching him play, captivated by the depth and emotion that radiated from each note. He didn't notice them at first, completely absorbed in the rhythm and flow of the piece he was creating. The audience, respectful and still, felt the raw honesty in his playing. A language that transcended words, he shifted through melodies, some familiar from his youth, others born from recent emotions. His life, with all its hardships, joys, regrets, and hopes, flowed through the music. The piano responded faithfully, imperfect, but willing. Each key carrying its own character, contributing to a symphony that was both personal and shared. He realized that the music wasn't just about him, it was about connecting, sharing, and creating something that resonated beyond the hall's walls. After a while, the manager arrived, clipboard in hand, but he didn't interrupt. Instead, he watched quietly, a small smile appearing on his face. He had once been indifferent, expecting routine and nothing more. But now he understood. The music had transformed the hall, the people, and even the man himself. It was no longer just a cleaning job. It was a journey, a bridge from isolation to connection. Children appeared, shyly peeking in from the hallway. They had heard the melodies and been drawn in by curiosity and wonder. They watched intently, their eyes wide, absorbing not just the music, but the emotion that accompanied each movement of his hands. Adults stood behind them, some smiling softly, others with tears quietly streaming down their cheeks. The music carried a weight, a tenderness, and a humanity that touched everyone in the room. He noticed the audience for the first time and paused, feeling a wave of self-consciousness. But then he realized that the music didn't need perfection to be powerful. It only needed honesty, heart, and presence. He resumed playing, allowing the notes to flow naturally, letting the piano speak for both of them. He felt a quiet thrill as he noticed the subtle ways the listeners reacted, the way their eyes softened. Their shoulders relaxed, and a faint smile appeared. Music had the power to connect without words, and today, that power was undeniable. As the days passed, more people came to hear him. Word spread slowly at first, then faster, until the hall was filled regularly. Some came seeking music, others came for the experience, and some simply wanted to witness something extraordinary in the midst of ordinary life. He played for them all, never seeking recognition, yet finding joy in the shared moments. He learned that music could heal, inspire, bring people together in ways he had never imagined. One afternoon, a local musician approached him, curiosity in her eyes. She asked if he would like to perform in a small local event. The idea terrified him at first. Performing publicly, outside the quiet safety of the hall, was a step into an unknown world. But she reassured him, gently encouraging him to share his gift with a wider audience. He hesitated, then nodded, feeling a mix of fear and excitement. The thought of reaching more people was exhilarating, but it also reminded him how far he had come from the quiet man who had once only cleaned floors and swept dust in preparation. He practiced daily, exploring melodies and improvisations, letting the piano guide him. Each day he discovered something new, an unexpected chord, a subtle rhythm, a harmony that brought tears to his own eyes. The audience in the hall grew accustomed to his experimentation, watching and listening, sometimes joining in softly with a quiet hum or clap. The music became collaborative in spirit, uniting the players and listeners in an invisible bond. When the day of the small event arrived, he stepped onto the stage, heart pounding but spirit ready. The hall was filled with friends, neighbors, and curious strangers. He approached the piano, fingers brushing the keys, and began to play. The music flowed like a river, carrying with it years of experience, emotion, and personal history. The audience was silent at first, then gradually drawn in, moved by the honesty and passion in his playing. The event was a success, not because of perfection, but because of authenticity. People responded with tears, smiles, and applause that seemed to echo through the hall. Afterward, strangers came to thank him, expressing how deeply the music had touched them. Children shared their excitement, adults shared reflections, and even the event organizers expressed admiration and encouragement. It was a moment of validation, but more importantly, it was a moment of connection, the kind that transforms both the giver and the receiver. Returning to the community hall afterward, he sat at the piano, letting the familiar keys greet him. The music he played that evening was softer, reflective, filled with gratitude and contentment. The hall felt alive, the piano a faithful companion, and he realized that his life had shifted in ways he had never expected. From a man performing chores in silence to someone who could create, inspire, and connect. He had found a purpose that was both fulfilling and transformative. The piano had taught him patience, resilience, and the value of quiet persistence. It had reminded him that even the smallest actions, like playing a single note, could ripple outward, touching lives in unforeseen ways. He felt a deep gratitude for the instrument, the hall, and the community that had embraced him. Each day became a chance to explore, create, and share. A daily adventure that brought meaning and joy. Over time, he realized that the hall had become more than just a physical space. It had become a symbol of hope, a place where talent could flourish and where people could gather to feel and reflect. The piano remained at its heart, patient, steadfast, and endlessly giving. It had transformed his life and the lives of those who came to listen. The music was no longer just for him. It belonged to everyone, and in that, he found a profound sense of fulfillment. He continued to return each day, cleaning, playing, teaching, and inspiring. People began to come not just for the music, but for the sense of possibility it represented. The hall became a place of learning, sharing, and connection, and he became a quiet leader. Guiding others through music and example, the once dusty, forgotten piano had become a beacon of life, hope, and beauty, and he had become its steward, its voice, and its storyteller.